Welcome to the webinar, everyone. I'm David Shenberger from CAI, and I'm here today to talk with you about the pandemic's effect on quality and some potential ways we can mitigate this impact. Our focus today is on a science and risk-based approach for quality systems operations. Remember, you can't distance from quality. Before we start today, I'd like to share a quote and a couple of pictures to frame our conversation. If you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. Lewis Carroll in Alice in Wonderland. So, let's take control of our processes and performance, understand the purpose of what we're trying to do, and help our people not to feel like Alice in Wonderland at the Mad Hatter's Tea Party. Pharmaceutical manufacturing companies are essential businesses in the current global environment of pandemic response. The products supplied are critical to the care and well-being of patients around the world. Continuing to operate in a controlled manner, following their quality systems, and providing safe and effective products are a significant challenge with unexpected illness, quarantine response, distancing requirements, and travel restrictions. We will discuss the areas which may expect challenges, provide sound engineering and science-based responses, and communication approaches, which will help navigate this challenging regulatory and quality environment. We're going to discuss possible impacts to plant operations. We're going to talk about approaches to coping with testing, maintenance, and calibration schedules, which may be impacted. Talk through a little bit about quality risk management, some best practice guidance, and, as I mentioned, the science and engineering basis behind quality requirements. Control of manufacturing is based upon verification, qualification, and monitoring. Our goal is safe and effective products, which are created by a reproducible and reliable process. Of course, the quality system affects everything. That's why it's a focus of every audit. So let's talk through why the quality system and quality culture are so critical to the manufacturing environment. Our goal: product quality, compliant operations, low life cycle operation cost, high OEE or overall equipment effectiveness, which is a combination of availability, performance, and quality. And we need to do this all while protecting our employees' health. So what are the pandemic conditions we're facing right now? We've changed site access. It's limited to essential operations. There may be no visitors. Vendors and suppliers may have limited access. We're focused on manufacturing continuity. So what does that mean for any projects that may have been ongoing? Our supply chain may be fraying. Are we having trouble getting products from certain areas that have effects of the pandemic? And our site personnel are managing stay-at-home restrictions from local governments and working from home. So let's dig into the impacts a little bit more. We talked about personnel, but there are limits on interactions. We may have staff shortages, as we discussed, and the limitation on site visits could affect things like outsourced training. How do we get our people trained? How do we onboard the new resources we may need to fill spots that are critical to operations? What if our vendors cannot deliver materials to our site, or they're unable to drop things off or position things appropriately? Are our raw materials and supply deliveries being interrupted? And what about PPE shortages? We are now competing with consumer markets as well as the increased usage by healthcare professionals. And we also want to talk about our quality and control systems. Do we have enough people to sample and run the lab operations? Who's doing our periodic reviews? Are they all being delayed? We'll get into some of that a little bit later. And how are we resolving deviations on time when the people needed to do the investigations may be all working remotely? in learning new methods of that process. Let's talk through these things a little bit further as we go through the presentation. We're going to talk later about business continuity, but I wanted to high level address the approach right now. We want a science-based plan that uses our process knowledge, things like data historian information, our lab information system data, so LIMS data, and our maintenance history that's in our CMMS. And we want to involve our subject matter experts. That's key to any science and engineering-based plan. So let's move into quality risk management, what a risk control strategy is, and start defining some risks. To prevent issues which detract from your readiness assessment, we'll start by defining these. So the major categories which impact startup and operations are manufacturing sites and technology, facilities, equipment, and IT systems, quality control, QA and regulatory, operations and environmental health and safety, organization and talent, and finally your supply chain. All these risks should flow into your overall risk control strategy. So how do we know what risk we can take? Looking in some broad categories, I'm going to start off by asking some questions, and then we'll hopefully dig into some solutions later. Environmental monitoring. What does our historical data show? Do we know what our high and low risk points are? Water sampling. What are our trends around our sampling points? Do we have that history to review? Do we know the effect of sanitization? Can we change that frequency? In our QC labs, let's look at our technician schedules, and can we do a science-based risk assessment on their activities? Moving on to maintenance. What are the critical maintenance activities? Let's look at our CMMS data. Are there systems or components that are high risks or have high failure rates? Do we have any predictive data? Things like oil analysis, vibration, other types of predictive maintenance history. Looking at calibration. What does our calibration data show? Have instruments showed regular drift in previous calibration intervals? We can also look back at our process history. If there's comparison instruments, maybe that can give us information. And lastly, if we do decide to make changes in our regularly scheduled SOPs or procedures, how do we go about that? Do we have to implement a formal change process? Can we do a planned deviation? What are the quality rules around emergency changes to activities due to external forces like the pandemic? So the building blocks of quality risk management are change management, understanding our quality metrics, our lifecycle management, statistics, and undergirding all of that is the product and process knowledge. It's all connected. Quality risk management leads into process control. That takes process knowledge, and that's based on statistics. So let's dig into this. The foundation of everything is process knowledge and science. What does it take to make a safe, effective, high quality product which serves the patient and doesn't cause harm? The building blocks in the wall then are quality risk management, change management, and knowledge management. Let's talk through the development cycle. We establish the quality target product profile, and then this forms the basis of design for development of the product. We need to determine the critical quality attributes, linking quality attributes to clinical safety and efficacy. When we do our process risk assessment, this then starts to link the process parameters and the critical material attributes to those critical quality attributes, and we define our critical process parameters. So design space is optional, but that adds to our process knowledge. It defines the space of acceptable process parameter ranges on a multivariate level. So if you think about, if I changed pressure, does that change my temperature operation range? Or if I change temperature, how does that affect my oxygen range or my conductivity range? These are all the things that developing your design space gives you as a manufacturing tool to operate more effectively and to optimize your process as you gain more process knowledge. Then you move into your control strategy. You design and implement your control strategy using risk management by linking your critical quality attributes to your process capability and detectability of risks. And finally, you build in continuous improvement. As I mentioned before, you use your gain in process knowledge to improve your design space, improve your control strategy, and make your process more efficient and effective. Improving the process operations using continuous process verification and continual improvement to manage that product life cycle and hopefully reduce your cost of goods while at the same time improving quality. A typical criticality assessment tool might look something like this. You take your criticality score as a function of impact and uncertainty. So the criticality score is a quantitative measure for the attribute's impact on safety and efficacy. The impact is known or potential consequences on safety and efficacy considering the biological activity, your PK/PD, immunogenicity, and the safety or toxicity. Uncertainty comes from the relevance of information that you have, such as preclinical, clinical, prior knowledge, literature, etc. And this is all based on the manufacturer's accumulated experience, relevant information, and data, and including any structural or functional relationships. Here's what a living risk assessment process flow looks like. You start off with your R&D inputs, your CQAs and your CPPs, as we've talked, that come about from product and process development. This leads into a preliminary process assessment. You identify your critical aspects of your operation during the C&Q effort, commissioning, qualification, or verification. You do a specific FMEA for that process and understand what the benefits coming out of that FMEA are: a risk-based qualification strategy, demonstrated process understanding, and your initial process control strategy. Then as you transition to manufacturing, you implement risk review to update the process controls, determine the residual risk, and revise your FMEA appropriately. When you hand that updated FMEA off to manufacturing, they now can use that to build their preventive maintenance schedule, develop their calibration activities, and build their manufacturing control strategy. As you get process performance, things like identifying certain operator errors and other failure cases, these get revised into the FMEA as your new risks. And if you review that FMEA as part of the life cycle, you increase your knowledge management. That feeds back to operator training and qualification. Okay, now after that overview, let's go into the actual execution and setup of a PFMEA. If you see our columns across the top, we have our failure modes, the causes of those failures, what our current controls are, the potential failure effects, what our current conditions are, what recommendations we're going to make, the actions to be taken, and then based on the results of the action, what our new risk number is, what our reduction is, and then finally relating it back to the URS. So let's talk through some examples. So a failure mode, for example, would be the temperature is out of acceptable range. This could be caused by a failure in control of set point for temperature. Our current controls are we have a temperature alarm and a pH alarm with the potential failure effect on the product of the pH being out of specification. We would assign a severity, a detection, and a frequency to this on a scale of 1 to 9. That would look like something like this: a severity of 3, a frequency of 1, and a detectability of 1, because we would know from our pH alarm, unless we had multiple failures, that our pH was out of specification. So you multiply those together, you get a 3. That's a low risk. So the recommendation is that our current controls are sufficient and no actions are taken. So for instance, let's look at something else. So temperature is out of range greater than. You have the failure in control, pH alarm, temperature alarm, same situation. So the severity of this, depending on the product, may be much higher, right? So this product may be much more susceptible to high temperature than low temperature, so we might give that a 9. If it's a product that reacts, maybe the frequency of this could be much higher. For instance, if we had failures in our control of set point. So maybe the frequency of this would be a 7 or a 6. So you multiply, and the detectability is probably still a 1 because we have the 2 separate alarms, both for temperature and for pH. So you multiply those together, you get a RPN of somewhere in the 40 to 50 range. So the recommendations may be different here. You might have a recommendation to not just have an alarm, but have a stop or some type of additional control added to reduce the frequency of those excursions. And so then you would run your testing and verify that your frequency dropped and document your % reduction in risk. You can see that you want to come back to these as you get more operational data, because that's going to allow you to fine-tune your frequency, your detectability, and maybe even your severity impacts based on actual product knowledge. So if you, for instance, think that your frequency of failure in control was a 3, but actually you have a lot of control failures, you may need to adjust that up to a 9, and then your recommendation is that you implement a different type of control. So for instance, if you had a control loop that just had proportional control, and I'm just using that as an example, you might include some integrative or derivative control into that to fine-tune your control and keep your temperature in range, and then assess that impact later on. And finally, just an example of the pump failure as a frequency of a critical aspect failure. Your detectability, you might have a dilution failure. So your critical attribute is the pump, your critical control parameter is dilution, and that leads to a pH being out of spec. So that kind of gives you a relationship between your critical aspect, your CPPs, and the critical quality attribute that you're trying to account for. So how does this all apply? How's it connected? You start off with a project which builds a facility. You add a staff and a process to that facility, and you have a quality group that provides the oversight necessary to ensure quality, effective product goes out the door to the patients. And this stretches from development through commercialization and then into full-scale operations. So let's close the loops to show how everything's connected. You have your product CQAs, which lead to the product CPPs, as we've talked about. Then we identify the system critical aspects. Once we have those critical aspects, we can use FMEA to identify the failure modes, and we build our maintenance program around those failure modes to protect the product critical quality attributes. Taking those same critical quality attributes, critical process parameters, then we develop our operating procedures. We're relying on human competency. We build that through training and hands-on experience. We have ongoing training to ensure and verify competency, and that again protects our product CQAs. So we talked earlier about the inputs to a risk control strategy. Our manufacturing science and technology group, facilities, equipment and IT systems, quality control, quality assurance and regulatory, operations and environmental health and safety, or our organization and talent, and the supply chain. When you link these risks with the three different types of controls, technical, procedural, and behavioral, the technical controls construct barriers to introduction of risks. We talked about some of these already, but these include system access controls, equipment interlocks and permissives, etc. Procedural controls are written standards that set the rules and guidance for behaviors, but they're not behavioral controls. Behavioral controls work to set the conditions for humans to perform predictably. This means performing with fewer errors and less temptation to violate procedures. When behavior is a problem, technical and procedural controls may help make someone pause before proceeding in the wrong direction, but if someone's mind is made up, these other controls may not be sufficient. Often the scoreboard goal is one of the most impactful tools to inspire predictable behaviors. Other behavioral controls will include strong supervisory skills, role clarity, transparency and communication, and a cadence of communication and structured, engaging, inclusive, continuous improvement program. These all act as risk controls to inspire predictable behaviors. It's critical to understand how the workplace inspires or detracts from high performance behaviors. So let's discuss some of these regulatory compliance elements. Let's start with manufacturing science and technology. They develop the product risk management profile, they build the product specifications, develop and define the methods, which help us ensure we meet our critical quality attributes. They lead the process validation and are a vital part of the tech transfer as we bring products into the new facility. Our facilities, equipment, and utilities, along with IT systems, are responsible for the physical infrastructure and engineering. Some of these items include the engineering quality process, which is made up of good engineering practices and engineering change management. The good engineering practices provide structured guidance to the engineers and technicians on how they perform their activities. These are a good tool for quality to use as they provide oversight over engineering. The engineering change management system should verify the installed processes and facilities match specification and are documented appropriately. Design qualification verifies the design meets the requirements, and we use verification of fit for use to start up and test the equipment as part of our integrated commissioning and qualification process, which is based on quality risk management. Data integrity is also a key part of this to protect our data, protect our facilities, and allow us to operate in a known state. To give an example, once while working for a manufacturer, the product would not pass specification. We did a traceability of documentation and discovered that the product specification was never truly completed. It wasn't defined, documented, and implemented appropriately. This could have been avoided by performing product risk management, identifying the product specifications, and implementing them, allowing us to have the proper methods and tech transfer and validation to protect the product. QA and regulatory includes your quality management system, your audits, customer complaints, recalls, and adverse event documentation, and your regulatory strategy. What filings, what communications with regulatory agencies, and any inspection readiness and response. You want your documentation system to support your goals. So, are you working toward your goal, or are you working for your documentation system? Many documentation and document control systems are over-documented, and they don't necessarily have to be. As human beings, we tend to complicate everything. Remember, you're writing for a user and an operator. So write with your audience in mind and implement and plan your regulatory strategy and your quality management system together. Focus on risk and trends from a deviation perspective, and instead of minor issues that do not affect product safety and efficacy, but can absorb large amounts of your QA and regulatory staff's time. Your quality control includes laboratory design, validation of cleaning, instrument qualification and calibration, analytical method validation and transfer, environmental monitoring, sample retention, and your stability program. Lab design and flow is highly concerned with contamination, cross-contamination, and sample ID mix-up risks. Regulations require reserve samples to be maintained for many years, often past the expiration date of the drug product or its active ingredients. Samples should be kept at site where testing is performed. Sample size should be 2x required to perform all testing. So labeling and storage conditions can often be a major issue as you progress through your manufacturing life cycle. Your stability program must meet prescribed storage conditions and scheduled testing. Again, how do you manage that over the long term? And if you look at your regulatory sightings of deficiencies, such as 483s or warning letters, many of these come from data integrity. How is data transformed, transferred, stored, and accessed and secured? So your computer system validation and instrument qualification become critical, as those areas directly affect the quality and integrity of your data. In operations, again, documentation is critical. Our batch records, how do we design and review those? Our SOPs, are we writing them? Are they usable? Are people following them? How do we coordinate and schedule our activities, batches, cleaning, changeover? EH&S, our permits, our waste management system, and our safety program. And then if you look at supply chain, our supplier quality, receipt inspection and testing, and the warehouse and shipping controls. What's the most common FDA observation? Not following SOPs. If it's not well written and usable, people will fail to adhere. If someone performs or verifies work who is not qualified, you're likely out of compliance. So coordination and scheduling can be a major issue in being operationally ready, having the right people in place at the right time to perform things that they're qualified to perform. Ensuring your suppliers can meet requirements, including your QMS, verifying quality agreements are in place to call out these requirements. Too often, supplier audits show that requirements were not originally set up for the suppliers, and then you're scrambling to build those quality agreements, service level agreements after you've gotten a citation. Let's move to the staff. Organization and talent, training and qualification. Organization and talent includes supervisor, leader qualification, governance and succession, hiring practices, compensation, and promotion. Training includes the staff training and qualification, of course, both on tasks and good manufacturing practices. It includes the trainer qualifications, change control impact assessment, and GMP behaviors. The top behavioral controls to human error risks are full, clear alignment throughout the organization, so clear priorities and effective communication, and then effective supervisory skills. Let's take this back to the pandemic response. What modifications can we make for environmental monitoring? Based on our data, can we extend our sampling times? What do the subject matter experts say? What does the data say? Every time we sample, are we close to violating our limits, or are we safely in our control area? Perhaps there's just points that we can reduce or eliminate temporarily while we're staff limited. Water sampling. Can we shift to automation, such as using online TOC and conductivity measurements instead of operator sampling or manual interactions? Again, what does our data say about the frequency? When we sample our water systems, are we against our control limits? Are we safely in control? And can we do things like increasing sanitization frequency using the automation to temporarily reduce our frequency? How do we document that? What do our subject matter experts say? In our QC labs, how do we adjust our shifts, staffing, and supervisory oversight to make sure that our samples are being handled effectively? We have the right qualified staff when we need them, but yet are practicing our appropriate distancing and personnel protection requirements to take care of our people. Moving to maintenance, how do we reduce and eliminate shutdowns? Are there maintenance activities which we can defer? Can we reassign some of these activities, such as lubrication or regular inspections, to the operators who are running the equipment every day? Is there a way we can train them quickly to pick up these activities? Calibration. Can we extend our calibration interval by 3 months or 6 months? Are all our current calibrations necessary? These are areas where risk assessments and analysis of our calibration history come in to play, and we can rely on our subject matter experts, our process history, and our data to potentially extend these intervals, reduce interactions with the plant, and reduce the exposure of our operations to maintenance technicians and cross-contamination while we're distancing. And then quality activities, revalidations, and annual reviews. Can these be done remotely? Do they need to be done every year? Perhaps we can reassess our quality activities and push revalidations for certain systems to a 3 or 5 year periodicity instead of an annual review if necessary. So many of these items, if you're changing them, may require a planned deviation and certainly will require strong coordination with your quality group. So we talked earlier about predictive maintenance. If we have oil analysis and vibration data, those might tell us that we can push off certain maintenance activities. Can we reduce or eliminate a shutdown by moving certain shutdown activities to product changeovers and allow for the maintenance technicians to come in and work with the operators to have them do certain critical maintenance activities during changeover when the plant is down already. All these items can be planned and analyzed for to maintain uptime, prevent cross-contamination, and allow us to distance our people appropriately. When you're looking at your calibration data, have you had instrument drift? Is there process history you can compare to and see if your instruments are really drifting or if you're just calibrating them and there's very little drift that's occurring? So let's go into maintenance and shutdowns a little deeper. Okay, you've missed maintenance. Now what? Well, let's review our history. Has this maintenance been missed before and what happened? Let's review the trend data. Perform a PFMEA or fishbone analysis. What are the potential failures and outcomes of this maintenance miss? Perhaps we need to run some more QC checks. We might need to increase system suitability checks. Maybe we need to run more standards. And how do we extend that qualified state? Do we need an approved quality plan, or is there some type of protocol we need to write? What do we do? So, you have a shutdown coming up. You haven't made enough product, or you're very worried about bringing those large numbers of people necessary to execute the shutdown effectively into your plant at a time like this. So, is it urgent? Do we need it? Just to cover some of our typical shutdown activities, we have routine elastomer replacements, mechanical seal replacements, heat exchanger pressure tests, routine derouging or passivation. You're doing your air handler maintenance, pre-filters and belts, and your clean room and HEPA testing. So first, let's look at where our failures come from. Often, infant failures, along with end-of-life failures, are the primary cause of random failures. Let's look at some failure profiles to think about the impact of shutdowns and scheduled maintenance versus predicted maintenance on our equipment. As you can see, high numbers of random failures occur with no evidence of wear out at the beginning of life. These so-called infant failures are not predictable and may be caused just by replacing equipment. In addition, unnecessary calibrations, wiring checks, and things like that that break circuits often can introduce faults that were not there before. So there can be some unintended negatives from doing shutdowns on a regular schedule instead of based on equipment predictive data. Let's look at that further. Early failures, why are so high? As I said, scheduled intrusive maintenance can actually increase overall failure rates by introducing infant mortality into otherwise stable systems. This increased conditional probability of failure after maintenance is a result of such factors as human error, use of defective material, errors in technical documentation, etc. An example is replacing a diaphragm and it starts leaking but wasn't leaking before you touched it. If maintenance were not mandated, there would not be the exposure to infant mortality, and no penalty and decreased operational availability would result. So what can we do instead? Perhaps up to 40% of all preventive maintenance tasks originate from diaphragm valve maintenance. So we could rely more on condition-based maintenance and reconsider the risk of elastomer replacements. For testing HEPA filters in clean rooms, evaluate the practices using the December 2015 update to ISO 14644-2, and reconsider the risk based on the newest revision to the specifications for testing and monitoring to prove continued compliance. You can utilize already scheduled or unplanned downtime for routine PM tasks which can't be deferred, and analyze each system on an individual basis. Don't automatically assume that you have to have a shutdown every 6 months and then look for activities to put into it. Can you remove calibration of non-critical instruments? Go to trace metals for derouging. Elastomers are a great activity for available downtime. And there should be multiple ways that you're looking at how maintenance gets done, not just shutdowns. So let's move to a discussion of our people, specifically training and leadership. How is it often done? The common approach is that while the capital project is underway, we hire some smart people, begin developing the process and writing batch records and SOPs, simultaneously racing through change controls and staff training toward some arbitrary deadline, either PPQ, inspection, or something like that. Throughout your readiness effort, the two-way communication is critical. No one knows the risks and problems better than those who are trying to overcome them. So use your communication cadence to gather data and look for trends that point to larger risks in the workplace. A major risk is a lack of clarity of purpose and role. This shows up in the form of either constant firefighting or drop tasks. Problems in this area usually stem from a lack of alignment within leadership or a chaotic organizational structure leading to a lack of role clarity. Your data may tell you that people's job expectations are not clear or consistent. In that case, it's very likely that you have competing priorities within the leadership of the organization. If so, you must go back to stair step number 1 on this diagram to gain full alignment on the mission and priorities of the organization. Otherwise, your success is at the mercy of whoever is setting the priorities and expectations of each role. If your employee data indicates that their skills are inadequate, you may look to find that workflows are not mapped well, or your SOPs are poorly written or not at all. In that case, any revision to your training program may simply reinforce bad habits. Once defined, the alignment on strategy must be communicated frequently and with clarity. It must permeate the organization such that the leaders at all levels are reinforcing the message, using that score of quality communication as a guideline for their team's behavior, tying their specific roles and tasks back to the impact that they have. Once defined and aligned, you map out your process flows that will enable the achievement. Have you defined your critical quality attributes and parameters and the critical roles and systems needed to meet them? So clear site-wide communication. This sets the stage for defining and assembling the functional leadership and staff roles, followed very closely by the systems and equipment. To accelerate your startup to readiness, there is almost implemented in parallel, although your functional system owners are necessary to best specify the right systems. Then, as you write your procedures, you qualify your staff as you go while building strong leadership and supervisory skills in parallel. There are some wonderful, simple, and successful practices for combining training and qualification quality with speed to streamline your training and learning paths and the use of technology, which also can expedite that training. And the last thing you should be doing as all this work pays off in operational readiness is celebrating your successes. You want to focus on operational excellence, not just operational readiness. You must put these practices in place before startup so that you can continue to improve and meet your expanding market demands and improving your competitiveness and effectiveness as you learn your product and process operational knowledge. So, celebrating successes, clear communication, and starting with leadership alignment on risk control strategy. So what does effective communication look like? Virtual pre-shift briefs. How do we involve each person? Are we still setting our daily goals? Confirming understanding. Reviewing our quality objectives. What's important today? Are we using our video meetings for risk management? So set your meeting objectives, select the stakeholders and subject matter experts, and make sure you have the right decision makers. Some engagement strategies for staff that may be working remotely. Use this as an opportunity to improve your processes and procedures. Can we leverage our team skills to review and update SOPs, job aids, etc.? Are we reviewing our batch records and comparing them to deviations and figuring out if there's ways to improve the batch records and limit future deviations of those types? What new skills can they be learning and implementing using augmented reality or other online learning schools? And if you don't have your CQAs and CPPs developed, this might be a good time to leverage your product and process knowledge to develop those and start your quality risk management journey. Talked a little bit about augmented reality using webinars, interactive polls. How do we interact on video? Can we teach our people the new protocols and methods of effective video communication? How do we measure effectiveness using online testing? Can we do practical verifications using an AR headset, doing qualification interviews, or do we just need a read and understand confirmation? So we started off talking about business continuity planning, and I wanted to close by talking through some specifics to think about. How do we handle the next wave of pandemic if there is one, or other disasters such as a hurricane, tsunami, tornado, or earthquake? Some of these suggestions are just items for discussion and may be controversial in your facility, but at one time or another, many facilities have had to deal with just these discussions. So do you need to modify your just-in-time procedures and warehouse more critical raw materials or spare parts? There's a shortage on glass vials right now, for example. Can you add approved suppliers to your procurement process, which would allow rapid response to supply chain interruption? If you need to establish manufacturing continuity, how do you isolate and keep your workers healthy and safe? Do you have an emergency plan to convert a portion of your facility to hoteling or a barracks type arrangement? Maybe an agreement with a local hotel for exclusive use of the entire hotel or just a dedicated portion. If you do that, how do you feed and provide laundry services for your staff? Prior agreements with the work teams on rotations and assignments. Do you have to do cross-training so that a certain group of people can come and live at the facility and be isolated until the crisis is passed? Do you have a process in place for temperature checks? Maybe you can convert entrances quickly to airlocks or clean transition places to limit contamination from the outside air. Another thought is, how do you evacuate your site safely for hurricane, tsunami, tornado, earthquake? Most companies now have figured out how to successfully manage remote work. What types of contingency plans do you need to have in place to make that process smoother? Time and distance plans for staff to come in office to collect the items they need. Who cleans out the refrigerator in the break room? As an example. What are your energy sources? Steam, electricity, fuel, etc. What's your desired operational window? Do you have enough diesel to make a batch or complete a batch that's in operation? Do you need redundant substations, as in multiple electrical feeds? And what's the intersection of all these? What's your limiting variable? Staffing, energy, raw materials. Making sure all these things are put into your business continuity plan will help you survive the next situation in the manner that you have planned. There's excellent guidance out there for industry, as we mentioned earlier, ASTME 2500. The ISPE baseline guide and good practice guides include GAMP and the GAMP good practice guides, a suite of good practice guides for various technologies, and finally, this suite of baseline guides created with input from regulatory agencies. PDA has an extensive set of technical reports which provide in-depth information about a variety of technical challenges and process implementation. So let's sum it all up. This is the time to change from the way we've always done it and implement efficiencies based on product and process knowledge using a quality risk management approach and strong business continuity planning. Plan for your next event, leverage industry guidance, use your stakeholders and SMEs knowledge, and make sure that you're implementing engineering and science-based rationales. I'm David Shenberger. Thanks for joining the webinar, and I'll be looking forward to your questions in a couple of minutes.